Hello and welcome to our Belmont Stakes Day preview show. We're going to be talking about this $1 Pick 6, all Grade 1 races happening on Belmont Day. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. I'm not your host for today. I'm one of the guests on this panel that includes a representative from our sponsors, Medallion Racing, fine handicapper in his own right. He's done a great job on the two previous Triple Crown shows we've done together. Speaking, of course, of Phillip Shelton. Phillip, how are things?
Good. Thanks for having me, Pete. I'm excited for this weekend.
And then the man in the Brady Bunch box right next to mine, coming to us not from the planet Texas today, but from a hipster hotel in Williamsburg, but he's still the people's champion, Jonathan Kitchen. JK, how are you enjoying your stay in New York?
You got a lot of nerve throwing around the word hipster as a man who lives in Brooklyn with a beard.
Surrounded by vinyl.
Yeah, take it easy.
And also very happy to have and to be able to hand over hosting duties that we certainly want to get her opinions as well as we go along today. A face you've seen in a lot of places, including on our network through the fantastic job she's been doing on the In the Ring Pedigree podcast, and also on Fox's Day at the Races and the Gulfstream simulcast feed. Acacia Courtney, how are you?
I'm doing great, Pete. I'm live from Saratoga currently, so we've got everything covered as far as locations for today's show.
I love it. Well, Acacia, without further ado, I'm going to hand off the microphone to you, and we should start going over this $1 Pick 6. I know it's a bet that JK in particular excited to sink his teeth into, but I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say. I'm ready to take my notes.
Yeah, it's a great sequence. It kicks off in the 6th race on Saturday, of course, June 5th, the day of the 153rd running of the Belmont Stakes, the final leg of the Triple Crown. Things are back on the calendar where they belong, which is always nice to see given everything and all the craziness and uncertainty we had last year. So we've got some really big fields and some super competitive races with some big star power. But the 6th race is the Grade 1 Jaipur, 6 furlongs on the inner turf at Belmont Park. And what a way to kick things off with Grade 1 action. You have the defending champ, Alexandra, who's one of 2 mares, got Stormy also trying her hand in here. Guys, this is where we kick things off. Not an easy way to do it, though, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a tough spot. Usually turf sprints don't make me too uncomfortable. I know some horse players get a little bit weird about turf sprints, but this one, for whatever reason, is pretty challenging. I get a little Biggie and Tupac when it comes to turf sprints. Like, I just give a little bit of an edge to the West Coasters. And so for that reason, I think horses like Sombeya, who I loved last time in that cutback, and Gorgarian Chant, who beat that horse, and then also Stubbins. I'll be building a lot of what I do around those West Coast turf horses, and then obviously I'll give a little bit of love to Got Stormy. I think the 6 furlongs is kind of right where she wants to be in that cutback sprint world.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting thing to me is normally you look at these turf sprints and it just feels like everybody's going to the front and you just got to figure out who's going to get the right kind of trip. This race almost feels like the exact opposite. I mean, I guess Bound for Nowhere with a clean break is going to go to the lead. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing. Fast Boat beat somebody last time. He came from way back. Gregorian Chant is a deep closer. Alexandra is a deep closer. Got Stormy at shorter distances has been more of a mid-pack type horse. I don't love Bound for Nowhere at 2-1, but to me, feels like he's going to have a big pace advantage. I also like somebody. I think he can sit close enough at the 6 furlong distance, and I probably lean on those two. But I do think it's a very wide open race. I think the interesting thing to me too is Bound for Nowhere just feels like on his best day, he's just the fastest horse. And he might get the best trip. Don't love the price, but
Philip and I reading off the same script. My notes right here say, looks the fastest and most accomplished runner who might get the best trip. Interesting to note that while he closed from fairly far back the last day, he could be on pace figures on the lead in this spot. I need plenty of Bound for Nowhere on tickets. Another one I definitely want to mention is number 10, Stubbins, who ran, I thought, okay in this race last year, all things considered, attending the hot pace and a pace that came back and collapsed in the end. I felt like the last time seen in the afternoon at Kentucky Downs, that was a troubled trip. And I just feel like the overall form of Stubbins is a little bit better than it looks. Plenty of question marks, but one I thought should be a nice price and could possibly trip out this time around. I was going to center my action around those two, but I think in terms of backups, you can go pretty deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I agree with what you mentioned, Philip, about the pace. I think you have to use Bound for Nowhere personally. Wesley Ward, as we've always expected with the 2-year-olds, has been cleaning up in New York, but here he is with a 7-year-old. And I realize this horse is hard to trust because he's not really consistently on the racetrack, but we don't really see a lot of guys sending pretty hard from the gate in New York. So maybe that's where Flavien Prat to the outside and Sambeye may try to upset a little bit with Bound for Nowhere, potentially being that main pace setter. The 7th race and the second leg of the sequence is the grade 1 Ogden Phipps, a 1.16 on the main track. You want star power. Here it is with the likes of Swiss Skydiver, She Dares the Devil, Latruska. This one is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, this race, on the Twitter, there's usually a lot of stupid things on Twitter, but an intelligent thing I've seen a few times is that this is probably one of the races I think a lot of people are really excited about. Seeing Swiss Skydiver, who I thought got a poor ride last time, and no offense to Robbie, but I would consider this probably at least a minor rider upgrade to Jose, especially at Belmont where Jose rides so often. I worry a little bit about her kind of getting in the same position she was last time, drawn on the inside with speed outside of her. Does she want to go? Does she want to take back? I think that Jose won't get stuck into that trick that Robbie did last time, trying to be overly aggressive and then changing his mind about the 7/8 pole. I would imagine that Jose will let Latruska and them break away from there, sit in behind and try to work out a trip. It was pretty much between her and She Dares the Devil for me. And I ended up, and I haven't always been a Swiss Skydiver fan, and I ended up going in that direction in here. I just think she's going to work out a good trip. Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. I don't know. I'm trying to think where my hate developed. I'm trying to think what bet she beat me out of.
My God.
No, I'm kidding.
That's a strong word.
Parimutuel hate. I love all of our four-legged friends. I mean parimutuel hate. There's a difference, a big difference. But and in the Latruska, I think last time was the time, right? Can she win this race? Sure. May she win this race? Absolutely. But I think that I'm going to try to lean on Swiss Skydiver, but I'll be protected by those two because there's some other opinions I want to make sure I get to in the sequence.
Yeah, I think for me, again, this is a great race. And this race traditionally, it normally has it may not have the deepest field every year, but it feels like everybody kind of shows up. I kind of like Bonnie South a little bit. I'm not going to be way against the favorites, but I think if you look at it, 2-back Swiss Skydiver or She Dares the Devil actually took the lead over Latruska. Latruska is obviously very fast early. I think Latruska drawn inside of She Dares the Devil. Maybe they're more aggressive with her. But really, I just think the 1.16 is the right distance. I think it's really interesting that Brad chose to run both of them here. There are other spots. There's like the Fleur-de-Lis towards the end of the month. That's a win and you're in for the Breeders' Cup. And the fact that he chose to run her here feels like, he thinks she's at least going the right direction. Second start of the year. She's just an interesting horse to me. And I think she might get the right trip. If Swiss Skydiver doesn't want to get stuck on the rail, you could have the three main favorites kind of do battle with each other early. And she would be the one I think that's going to be trying to come late at 10-1. I would weight her maybe just as strong as any of the top three and just hope that she gets the right setup.
I'm team Swiss Skydiver in this spot. I feel like she's just better than her bare form looks. JK touched on it. The ride last time didn't work out as planned, and I think it most certainly compromised her chances. The time before that, I thought was just so visually impressive and ran a fast time as well. I figure hopefully She Dares the Devil and Latruska will engage on the front end, and Swiss Skydiver will find herself in a better spot and be able to go for kind of a stalk and pounce trip. But to Philip's point about the idea that there could be a pace meltdown in here, especially if Swiss Skydiver goes on with it from the rail, the closer I was going to take a long look at was number 2, Valiance, who I thought could potentially get that same good setup that Philip was talking about for Bonnie South. Valiance's best race is not far behind these, and I think you can make a case that she's the best closer in a race where you can conjure a meltdown scenario. So I was going to have plenty of 1, a little bit of 2, and then also to echo something JK said, She Dares the Devil will not be left off of my tickets just because she's just been so good and just fits on figures and form. I'll have some backup lines with some 5s on them as well.
Well, Pete, I'm so glad you mentioned Valiance because I am using Valiance 100%. One thing I wanted to just mention about her is just in conversation with Todd Pletcher the other day, she said that she's just been training better than she ever has. And at the start of her career, when she ran in that off the turf powder break in May off the layoff, that was when the pandemic first hit and nobody really knew where to run their horses. If you told me then she was going to be a grade 1 winner on dirt, I kind of would have said you're crazy. But we did see her really develop as a 4-year-old, and Todd Pletcher off the layoff with distance runners. I don't know if there's anybody really better as far as that stamina. And one other thing I wanted to mention is Bonnie South has been outworking Essential Quality in the mornings. So she's one that might be taking a little bit of outside attention. He's not a great workhorse, but just kind of an open question for any of you guys. Are those workouts something that you really look in a lot when building these tickets?
I'll let JK. For me, I think it's one of those things that if you really follow it every single time a horse runs, they're great. If I'm just going to jump in and say, hey, I liked Bonnie South's last work, but I have no clue what her 20 previous works look like, that's like fool's gold in my opinion. Outside of just an indication that she's doing well. But to me, if you follow them all the time, they're incredibly useful because I think it's very easy to get a guide on this horse seems to be coming into her own or not. There are some horses just work great every time. There's some horses just work poorly every time. And if you just take it on the face and say that's a poor work, well, it could just be the way that horse works right before they go run the race of their life every single time. So I try not to get too into it unless like the grade 1 horses, I will follow them more because I pay attention to how they work more often. But we'll look at some of the races later that I could have no idea to tell you how good of a workhorse they are in the morning. And I think that is important.
I think that's a bunch of the key points. I'll just echo in, Acacia. I think you made the point about that's probably just who Essential Quality is in the mornings at this point. I was worried that the way he looked for me working going into the Derby meant he wasn't going to fire his best shot. And as we'll talk about later in the show, I think he can make the argument he was best that day. So when a horse has shown they can run great off works that I just consider okay, I'm not going to downgrade them in the future.
And the other thing I'll add about works is that you got to treat the horse, the individual, when you're considering these situations. And when I think about Essential Quality, to me, he's a grindy type of horse. So I don't expect grindy types of horses to outwork horses that maybe prefer a mile or a mile and a 16th. So I'm not too concerned about that.
And I would say like Bonnie South, just really quick, is a great example. If you look back right before she won the race at Keeneland, which had Speech in it, who ran off form, didn't look like there was a ton of speed. I really wasn't sure what kind of trip she was going to get in there. But right before that, her work before, she worked 58-4, fastest of 28. She just worked another bullet, fastest of 43. So to see kind of a similar pattern emerge right before a race, that's really what I look at the most, is just how do they work leading in and then how do they run, and to try to spot a similar pattern, that would be a positive.
Yeah, I love looking at those patterns. And looks like she is coming in feeling ready to roll. That'll be a fun one. That's the 7th race, the grade 1 Ogden Phipps. As we'll turn the page and go to the 8th. Grade 1 action continues, as is the theme on Saturday. We're on the turf here on the Widener, going a mile in the Just a Game. This one, I thought, yes, it kind of revolves around Chad Brown, as he has 4 runners in here. JK, are you using all of the Chads, or is there other ones that you're interested in here?
Yeah, I'm going to build most of my stuff around the 2 Chads, Pocket Square and Tammy here. And I don't typically play the jockey musical chairs game because, as we know, when it comes to, we all know a jockey's agent. You hear these stories of why they stayed there and had to go here instead of there. And that was, horse wasn't going. This horse is. But it's clear to me that Irad had a choice whether he was going to stay on Tammy here or ride Pocket Square. Sometimes Chad will say, you won on this one, you stay there. But I feel like Irad picked Pocket Square. Pocket Square was very impressive last time. And then Tammy here, I've kind of been in love with since the Sands Point, the way that horse won the Sands Point. I think I've probably been with her in her last 2 losses. I think she's going to eventually figure it out. And we all know that Chad points for these spots, these big grade 1 races on the grass, basically his entire year. I would imagine with Pocket Square and Tammy here, started with this race and then worked backwards with the Diana somewhere in the mix later on. So those are the two I'll be building around from what I understand. And I'm interested to see what Pete says. Now, the Euros coming over are not the Euros that we typically need to fear and kind of bend the knee to when they come over. So I'm going to build a lot of things around the two Chads.
Yeah, I would say, just to piggyback on that, the Godolphin horses that go to Dubai when it relates to fillies are typically not the European grade 1 winning type horses. I think it's kind of interesting. I think from a pace perspective, last time probably was the time to have Blowout, but it does feel like she might get loose again. I thought it was like an unbelievable ride by Pratt to really just go and make them come get them. Maybe Summer Romance goes early. I think Tama here is a horse that's really interesting. Her best race in Europe was on really soft ground. Last time out, she couldn't get to Juliet Foxtrot on soft ground. That horse got loose, and she ran her career best number. If there's what feels like there's going to probably be some give in the ground on Saturday, I think she's interesting. I picked Zafel last time, and I'm just going to stick with her. I think she's got a monster turn of foot. I think she maybe had to go a little earlier than she wanted to last time because Blowout had opened up so much. And she's basically ran one time on yielding ground. That was at the fairgrounds. At that point in her career, it was her lifetime best by 10 points. So I think maybe the soft ground could even move her up some. What I would say is this is an unbelievable betting race. You basically have 12 horses that are going to run somewhere between a 93 and a 97 buyer. So drawing a line between them is really interesting. And I'll also use Pocket Square. I think she could be 3 months from now, she could be the best horse to come out of this race.
It's a really competitive and interesting one. I put Tama here on top just based on notes and looking back over the races. I felt like, as has been mentioned, she had a few things going against her the last day, not just chasing a loose, impressive winner in Juliet Foxtrot, but also getting very lit up early stages of that race in a way that suggested maybe she needed to run a little bit. Sometimes you'll see him come back from the layoff and be very fresh like that. Coming here with a steady string of 4 works and the form of the Jenny Wiley working out pretty well. I definitely want some Tama here amongst my A-line runners. I totally take the point that these aren't, these are not the better European fillies coming over for this spot, but I think they're both live. I put Alfiqua ahead of Summer Romance, just trying to envision the way the pace is going to shake out. Summer Romance has done so well since she became a front runner. I think she'll be able to keep Blowout honest on the front end. Looking at their back races, Summer Romance has plenty of class. I kind of want to include her too, but I feel like Alfiqua has a real shot to be the best of the closers in this spot. And the same way JK was talking about in turf sprints being a little prejudiced in favor of that West Coast form. Sometimes in these USA turf races, even at a high level like this, it's not a terrible idea when they've got a little bit of class like these two Euro runners do to upgrade them a bit. So I'm definitely going to have 10s, 8s, and 9s, but I don't think it just ends there. There's so many ways you can go in this one.
Pete,
go ahead. Go ahead, Jake.
I want to see if Pete can name a UK rapper to get into this conversation with Biggie and Tupac.
Oh, that would have been good. I don't think there's any UK rapper at the level of Biggie and Tupac. I think you can safely say
that's fair. That's fair.
You should be a politician.
That's very well done.
Don't wish that on me, JK. Don't wish that on me.
Well, I wanted to mention a long shot in here. I'm going to give you a New York girl. Maybe it's the hunch bet, Belmont Day. But I saw this filly in her first U.S. start down at Gulfstream, and she was a tepid favorite that day. And to be fair, she didn't beat too much that afternoon, but she just blew me away in how she looked. She didn't look like that kind of lighter, more feminine, not really carrying a lot of condition type of Irish bred filly. And she'd been facing some really good company prior to coming here to the U.S. In fact, the horses that she was running against would have completely blown away all the fields that she's running so far. This is definitely the deepest field that she's facing, but I think that she has the ability to be tactical. She was half a length behind Blowout, 3/4 of a length behind Micheline. She's one that I'm interested in at a bit of a price, and I think will get overlooked with the Chad Brown runners in here. There's a little long shot play for you, but that'll be a fun one as we head over to the 9th race here, perhaps the most prestigious non-Triple Crown race, the Met Mile, the Hillendale Metropolitan Handicap this year, Grade 1 mile on the main track, race 9. And I think it is worth mentioning, gentlemen, with no charlatan in the race, that makes it a little bit more wide open. You've got the likes of, by my standards, Knicks Go, the favorite, opting to run in this race.
Yeah, if the real Knicks Go shows up, it's going to be a tough day for the rest of them. You know, I don't know what the deal was with this conversation with Knicks Go. Like, maybe he's going to go to Lone Star. I mean, I don't know why that's a little concerning, like why this wouldn't be the absolute place he's going to show up. I understand that some horses made decisions based on Lasix, no Lasix at Lone Star, but Knicks Go's biggest win, or one of his biggest wins, was in the Pegasus with no Lasix, so you'd figure that wouldn't be an issue for him. I don't know. I mean, call me crazy, but if he runs like one of any of his last 3 races out of the one at Saudi, he'll absolutely win this race. I don't care even if the real mischievous Alex shows up. Now, if he doesn't show up, he doesn't run the race that I think we all expect or hope that he'll run, I think the one mischievous Alex absolutely fits. I don't love the inside draw for him. And I think Dr. Post is a horse that's always shown talent and seems to keep progressing. And when I find horses that are progressing with trainers who are in the Hall of Fame, I usually think they're going to continue to improve. And that's how I feel about Dr. Post.
Yeah, I can't add much more than what JK said. I mean, to me, it's Knicks Go's race to lose. I think the thought was they were going to run in Lone Star. It was obviously not as big a purse as this, but it was $400K. You got to run on Lasix, and there's no charlatan. When charlatan bowed out, they defaulted to this. You know, to me, it just feels like he's probably going to be, you know, mischievous Alex has speed, and drawn from the rail, you just wonder, you got Dr. Post, some of these other horses that are going to want a similar trip just in behind. Does that force his hand a little bit? But to me, it feels like Knicks Go is going to be loose. The question is, right, just how does he bounce back from Saudi? And it used to be, you know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, it was really hard for horses to come back and run this early in the year. But then, like, you know, kind of Frosted put that to bed. You know, he went to Dubai, which was earlier, and then he came back and won this race, what felt like you know, from here to Manhattan. So it's just one of those things, you know, if he's ready to run, like, I just think they're going to have a tough time beating him. I think he is going to get the right kind of trip he wants. And he's proven that he can go fast early, and it just doesn't matter. I mean, he can go 44 and change and still win. So the question maybe would be cutting back to one turn. Does that change, you know, anything? A lot of his races last year is 2 races at Keeneland. That's a 2-turn mile. Gulfstream obviously was 2 turns. So does cutting back to 1 turn change the narrative? And the negative is you're just going to have to take a short price, but feels like one you just probably take and move on.
I think if you run with that thought about how well he runs the turns, you could maybe try to conjure a case against him. But for me, it's just as simple as the old cliche about pace and making the race and all that. I just don't think there's something to run here with him early. I think the seeming disappointment in the 1-turn mile the last day had everything to do with a freaky horse in Charlatan just taking the race to him in a very serious way. And with no charlatan signed on here, I'm just going to turn the first part of this conversation anyway into a chorus about how much he's the most likely winner and how happy I am to press him. But I'm not going to stand fully alone. And JK already made an excellent case for number 2, Dr. Post. This horse just looks to be thriving. Loved the win in the Westchester, a traditional prep for this. That race came back strong on the clock. If somehow Knicks Go doesn't show up, or somebody else goes on a mission to try to take the starch out of him early, and the 1-turn configuration really is a problem, Dr. Post can absolutely have a say. And in any case, he's a terrific exacta partner with Knicks Go. And I may have one backup line on Silver State as well, a horse who's shown admirable consistency, and I'm guessing, just guessing, will be well suited to the 1-turn mile. This is another horse who I feel like definitely makes sense for your verticals, passing tired speed. And again, I'll try to have at least one line of something with the Silver State on top, but it's really Knicks Go's race to lose.
Who do you guys think would be the most likely horse to press Knicks Go if that scenario played out? I think that's what I look for. Yeah, I try to just figure out who could be the one to go with him. And it just feels like, you know, he wants – I agree. I think he probably is, just given the rail draw. But I'm just like, you look at his best races and he just really wants to kind of sit just off and loom up on the outside. Now he's obviously stretching out to a mile, but I don't think the pace is going to be way slower in this race than what it's been the past couple. That's what I couldn't find. I wanted to go against Nick's Go with the ship back 6-5 off the layoff, but I just couldn't find the horse that was going to be able to put pressure on him.
Yeah, and Irad's not historically the type of rider that's going to be that one that takes on the horse that can go 44 and change. He'll try to probably pop away from there, but I could see him looking over. I could see him looking over, seeing Joel, and then easing back and letting Joel go.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of thinking that somebody was going to try to press Nick's Go in the Pegasus World Cup and he wouldn't be able to hold on for the 1 1/8. And he just kept going faster and faster and faster. So just echoing what you guys had to say, it's Nick's Go's race to lose. Let's see if he's able to live up to that as we continue with the grade 1 action. Race 10, the Manhattan, as salty a race as you could possibly draw up in this already very deep division, 1.25 miles on the inner turf here. We will get a chance to see the rematch of Domestic Spending and Colonel Liam, who did also dead heat in the Turf Classic last time out.
Yeah, that was a heck of a race, and I think we're all very happy and lucky that we're going to get to see them hook up again. I guess some might argue that Domestic Spending theoretically has the edge going the extra 8, but Colonel Liam has the edge because he's tactical. He can get into a better position early. He's less likely to run into traffic issues, and it's funny to think that's they dead heated last time. I think they're very similar horses with different tactics, but what one lacks, the other one has, and it ends up kind of at the end of the day, they finish at the same time. So they'll probably dead heat again.
What kind of price can we get on that?
Exactly. I'm going to definitely have to have those two. Giving an edge to Colonel Liam just because I, by nature, am in favor of more tactical horses. But I think there's a couple other ones I do want to mention that I will be involved with. The 9 Gufo, I think he's going to continue to improve. And talking about Domestic Spending and Colonel Liam, I think it's just more evidence that those 3-year-old turf horses last year that are now 4-year-olds were a darn good bunch of horses. Yeah. And Gufo was in that mix. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, the only one that hasn't really trained on is Decorated Invader. He's the one that just kind of hasn't lived up to what the other 3 have. So I'll continue to kind of ride that Gufo thing as long as this group continues to be what I think they are. I think he was a little bit unlucky in the Man of War, and I think the cutback will help with him. And then the 5 Masterpiece, another horse I'm going to be using. And admittedly, it's for silly Saratoga reasons. I just remember last summer being at Saratoga and someone, you get that backstretch chatter. Someone had said that, like, Chad loves Masterpiece. He's the replacement for Bricks and Mortar. And so I was like, ooh, Masterpiece. But he didn't run that great last year, but he seems to kind of have figured it out now. He ran well at Keeneland in that allowance race, and hopefully he'll continue to progress. And a lot of times people wake up the next morning and say, I can't believe Chad beat me at 7-1 on the turf in a grade 1. Well, it ain't going to happen to me because I'm going to use Masterpiece.
I would say this is probably my strongest opinion of the day, and it's Masterpiece. Just to reiterate on chat or on what Jonathan said, I had heard this very similar chatter to what Jonathan had heard. And I even heard that they were really concerned about the 1.5 miles, that they just didn't think he wanted to go that far, but there really wasn't another grade 1 race. I thought the allowance race he ran at Keeneland was really good. It was like one of those typical Rosario rides where you're just sitting there like, what is he waiting on? And then he ended up winning more or less in the hand ride. The horse that ran 4th came back to just run 2nd in the Dixie at Pimlico and got beat by some like at Hot Brown. And I just think from a bigger perspective, he's just faster than some of these horses. I think the 1.25 miles is going to suit him perfect. I don't think he has to be way off. The only, negative to me was I wish Rosario stayed. And I'm not way against everybody else in here, but I just think he's going to be the right kind of price. And I just think, again, kind of a similar thought to Pocket Square earlier. I think like after this race, we might say, hey, he's the best American turf horse. I think he's that level of talent. So he's really going to be my strongest opinion probably of the whole day. And I'll try to figure out how to wager. I mean, I'm going to have some backups, obviously, to the logical Colonel Liam. Thought Domestic Spending ran really great last time. And I think if you really like Colonel Liam, I think you're going to get a better price here. I think some people are, there's a lot of other ways to go. Like in the Turf Classic, it felt like, hey, he's going to really have a great tactical advantage. A lot of these horses are off a layoff. Here, if you want to fade him, you got a lot of other options. So I think you will get a better price. But for me, I really like Masterpiece, and I'm going to focus a lot of my wagering around him.
It's a compelling case for one. It's going to be a big number, but I just couldn't shake the idea that the Turf Classic was going to be the key form line in this spot. I was so impressed by that race. And then, of course, the form coming back to be franked by Smooth Like Straight's big run over the weekend. For me, in trying to separate them going forward, I just took the idea that condition might be the key handicapping factor. And for me, despite not having as much tactical foot as Colonel Liam, Domestic Spending is the one who, when I watched that last race, I just think coming and running that well off the layoff and then getting the distance change today, he's just got to move forward. So I'll be using tons of Colonel Liam, but I was thinking of pressing up Domestic Spending a little bit. And then certainly I've been talked into putting Masterpiece on a backup line for sure. And then I'll also echo that idea of Gufo as a reasonable horse for a backup line. Had a great setup the last time, didn't quite get there, but I feel like the turn back and distance should suit. And this one will be flying late. I don't want to get beat by Gufo.
You know, I want to talk about that setup. You're right. They did run in front of him, but and I've never sat on horseback before, except for that one time in Puerto Vallarta when I was 15. I've always felt like it would be very hard to time a ride when there's a loose runaway winner.
Yeah.
Like, because you have no concept. You spend 9 other races of the day being within 4 or 5 lengths of everyone. So now your timing is this and that based on going to catch the leader. But when a horse is 20 feet or 20 lengths in front of you, do you go? Do you should I wait? Am I too soon, too early, too late? Sometimes when there's a runaway leader in a race, I forgive horses that maybe came up short because I just would imagine that's got to be difficult.
One thing you mentioned about Gufo, and obviously I'm biased. I'm going to be rooting for him, of course. And he, to be fair, he hung last time. He's been working with blinkers on, and I know that there was consideration in potentially running him this weekend in blinkers because he's now missed a couple times in grade ones of just not being able to get there and timing it. And that's the problem with a horse like him, is that he is so far out of it early and flying late. But let's talk about the pace really quickly before we move on to the Belmont. You've got Tribavant in here. You've got Colonel Liam, who is tactical. Yes. We saw Channel Cat set the pace last time. Bye Bye Melvin, City Man, their best chances are to be forwardly placed, I would think. How did you guys see it playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also when you have, and obviously, trainers are going to do what's best for both of their horses. But the truth of the matter is that City Man's best chance to win this race is to be forward. And it just so happens that they're trained by the same trainer. So it works out great from a team tactic standpoint. City Man, you go, see if you can get loose. Don't let anyone else get loose. Gufo, you take back, make one run, and let's see which situation falls in the hands. I think that when there's a pace question and it's the same trainer with 2 different styles, I always assume that the other one's going to go. Because everyone knows that City Man's not going to take back and outkick Domestic Spending, Colonel Liam, or Masterpiece. It just ain't going to happen. So let's be aggressive and let's sin. So to your point, Acacia, I do think the pace will be – let me take that back. This is New York, and it's on the grass.
New York.
In a perfect world, the pace will be honest and fast, but I guarantee they go 50 to the half now that I said it.
Yeah. You said the magic words, New York grass. Everybody's just going to break and grab, and it'd be I completely agree with what JK said earlier. I mean, that's my thought with Zafel earlier was like, hey, blowout was 8 lengths ahead. At some point you had to tackle her. I think she did it too early. New York Girl kind of made the last move, which felt like the right move. Everything started to collapse. I agree. Do I think that Tribhuvan is going to be 4.5 lengths ahead? Absolutely not. I think the other horse is Channel Cat, who breaks directly inside of him. I mean, Channel Cat basically has one way to win, and it's to go straight to the lead. He is not passing horses in the lane. So given some of the horses that could go further to the inside, yeah, if it was anywhere other than New York on the grass, I'd say you're going to get an honest pace. And, the big days feels like you get a little bit more honest paces than a regular Saturday at the meet. But, I think it's going to be honest. With Gufo, he could certainly win. believe me, we've had plenty of those horses in our stable that's like you feel like you just have no clue what you're going to get because they're going to be coming from 10 off of it. And not only with pace, you got to get the right trip. You can't lose a ton of ground on the turn. The one thing is that you're going to get value. You know, if you like him, he's been a very short price in a lot of his races. He's not going to be that here. And you're going to get paid to take the risk that you get the right kind of trip.
When I tried to design the race in my head, it looked like it was going to be a fast pace, thinking about all the tactical considerations. Because it's New York, I did downgrade that idea to think it might be more just like a modest pace with various runners whose best chances are to go forward. But I did still think it would be fast enough that did factor in a little bit to my preferring domestic spending slightly to Colonel Liam in this spot.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know that it's going to be so slow that it's going to absolutely compromise anybody's chances. And I think that's all you could ask for in a big G1 on a big day is just everybody gets a fair run at it.
Yeah, looking forward to that Manhattan with a very tough field as it's time for the big one. Race 11, 1.5 miles. Of course, the Belmont Stakes last year, 1.125 miles as the first leg of the Triple Crown. We're back to one lap around the Belmont Oval, 1.5 miles in the Grade 1 Belmont Stakes. Who do we like?
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to kind of get hooked into Essential Quality for a while now in this race for a number of reasons. And then Rombauer had to jump up and run an impressive Preakness, and then he puts me in a bind now where I have to make a decision between the two of them. I think that as a young handicapper, not when I first started to kind of pay attention to the Belmont, I had this impression that like horses that came from off of it were going to be in a better situation when they got more ground. And then as I've watched more Belmonts and lost money and learned, being forward and being grindy and being one paced and the ability to stay the distance is really all that matters. And to me, Essential Quality is that horse. He's grindy. He's going to stay connected. He's got an aggressive rider in Luis Saez. He's got a trainer who believes that the distance isn't going to be a problem. He traveled 68 feet further than everyone else in the Derby. And then if you take the adjusted times on feet traveled per second, he actually ran the fastest time in that race in the Derby. And I just feel like he's going to appreciate this trip. And I've said it before that when I had Brad Cox on my podcast, he mentioned that after his first work, he said to his assistant, "This is our Belmont horse." And whatever he saw that day was that grindy type of horse that doesn't get tired. And that's why I think Essential Quality will win this race. I think he'll be hard to beat. But I'm not discounting Rombauer at all. I think Michael McCarthy does a phenomenal job. And I personally like the switch to Johnny. Johnny knows how to ride the Belmont. And I like the fact that Johnny will probably have him a little bit more in the race, understanding that. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Johnny, but I could mess this up. But the Dunkirk thing, it's one of the things I've always remembered. Dunkirk back in the day, this deep closer, and it's kind of my thought about Known Agenda as well, is Todd put that horse on the lead because he understands the importance of being forward in this race. And so, I love Essential Quality. I'll build a lot around him, but I will have some Rombauer and I will have some Known Agenda just because I respect Todd and his ability to do well in this race. We've seen it time in and time out.
Yeah, I'm going to be heavily weighted to Essential Quality. I think just to reiterate on everything Jonathan said, I think not only if you count the feet per second traveled in the Derby, but it was like he would have won by like 5 or 6 lengths. It wasn't even like he was slightly faster than everybody else. It was a somewhat significant difference. I kind of like Known Agenda as my main backup. Again, I'll be heavily weighted, but I just thought not that the rail draw did him in, but it was really the lack of early speed. And I don't know if they just needed to hustle him out of there more than what they did and really try to ride him more aggressively into the first turn. But once he got 14 or 15 lengths off the lead, I mean, his race was more or less over. I think drawn a little bit further outside, you figure Rock Your World just going straight to the front. He might get a lot better, or he should get a lot better trip here than he got in the Derby. I may even have a couple of saver tickets with Rock Your World, just thinking, hey, he's going to go straight to the front. If you talk about the horse that absolutely had zero shot in the Derby, it was him. I mean, he broke out. Rosario lost an iron. You thought he got one way to win. It's going to the lead. And 2 seconds into the race, he's 19th of 20. I mean, his race was over from that point on. I could see a scenario where, hey, he wants the 1.5 miles. He's by Candy Ride out of an Empire Maker mare. he goes straight to the front and kind of freewheels on the lead. But to me, it's Essential Quality's race to lose. He's likely to get probably the best trip. He can sit close. If they go really fast, he can sit further off. If I had a main be it would be Known Agenda. I'm not way against everything else. I think one thing that worked in Ron Bauer's favor was he was a little bit further off. I think if you looked at the Bluegrass, he sat close to Highly Motivated and Essential Quality, and he probably paid the price. And, this time it felt like, hey, he was a little bit further off. They went a good pace in front. With that said, he was miles the best in that race, and he certainly didn't look like distance would be a problem. I still talk myself into wanting to bet closers in this race just because it's the romantic style of, coming down the stretch at Belmont. And, I grew up and it's Victory Gallop, nailing them on the line, or Birdstone nailing them on the line. It's all these horses that are coming from off. So as a throwback to my childhood, I love that style. But like JK, I've also lost way more money than I've ever made betting that style. So, as I've gotten older, I just I cheer for that run. But I think, to me, it's Essential Quality, and I'm hoping he stays somewhere at 2-1. The one thing you would say is he's just not faster than everybody else on figures, but it just feels like he's got, he's just the best horse, even if he's not faster on figures visually.
When you were describing that running style, and the Belmont Victory Gallop came to mind, and I was remembering that day well and feeling real good about myself till you mentioned your childhood, and I realized that I was 26 years old. Anyway, I was gonna lead off. Another guest on the panel committed a little bit of a foul by tooting his own horn. I won't say who it is because I was going to bring up the idea that I'd heard on this obscure racing podcast a few months ago. Brad Cox talking about how Essential Quality was his Belmont horse, and I think it might tie in, as JK was quite correctly saying. Maybe there's a connection between that idea of that grindy. It just goes out there and does his business and looks happy to do it for as long as you ask him. And the fact that he isn't particularly brilliant in the workouts. I agree that the horse was best. JK made the point about the ground that he lost in the Belmont, but I just thought the trip was disadvantageous. He didn't break well. He had to use energy to get into position. Live, I thought he won, or was going to win, as they ran in front of me that day. And I think some people have said he hung. I don't think he really hung. I just think that the exertions between the ground loss and the trickiness of the trip just told on him. I think this is his spot to shine. I think it's interesting that the presumptive Derby winner by the same trainer doesn't go here and is going to the Haskell. Now, granted, it makes sense. I get it. Mandaloon does feel like one who's going to be better at 1 1/8, but it's just another subtle arrow that points in Essential Quality's direction. I respect a lot of others in this field. I need to have some backups with Known Agenda. We've seen what Todd Pletcher has done in the past with the Derby to Belmont layoff. It was Johnny V on Dunkirk that day, JK, and the rail. The rail was good. I was there for that one as well. But there's a lot of reasons why I want to have some backups with him. But in the main, I'm going to go to bat with Essential Quality and see if he isn't the winner of this year's Belmont Stakes.
And for the record, I do think that Rock Your World will be on the lead. I think he'll be on the lead at the half-mile pole. But I think while the rest of the horses are turning left, he's going to try to go right and get on the Long Island Railroad because he doesn't want to go 1.5 miles.
Well, I think he's going to try to go onto the turf course personally. That's my
or there.
Guess. Or
might take
there
a hard
too.
left to the turf course.
I'm team Essential Quality as well. I like Rock Your World as a horse. He just still moves like a turf horse to me. I think because of his speed and his Santa Anita Derby, he will be a little bit of a shorter price. I also think Hot Rod Charlie, who's nobody has mentioned yet, will be overbet. He is a horse that I had actually liked going into the Kentucky Derby, and he has not really shown the tendency to want to pass horses. He's been trained really aggressively, really strong gallop outs leading into this Belmont Stakes. Before we start with questions, what are the thoughts on Hot Rod Charlie with the presence of Rock Your World to his outside, being drawn to the inside? Looks like that's going to be the disadvantage for him.
Well, I'll leave the pace situation to Pete because I know he has an opinion about what style Hot Rod Charlie's probably best at. But for me, it's clear the best prep was the Louisiana Derby. That was the best prep race. Obezos, Hot Rod Charlie, and Mandaloon obviously coming all out of that race and running well in the Derby. So he does get some extra credit for that. And just an old adage that I've always kind of at least subscribed to since Nyquist, and I'll have another, is that Doug O'Neill's training style and how aggressively he gallops his horses, they stretch out well. And the more distance, the better. They just clip along in that grindy style. We're talking about the essential quality. So he can win, but I'm going to lean on the Todd, Johnny, Michael McCarthy, essential quality kind of corner and think that one of them will be able to get the job done.
I think there's a real chance Hot Rod Charlie will be ridden very forwardly in this spot. I mean, obviously his Derby was very good, but JK mentioned how good the Louisiana Derby was, and the early speed served him very well that day. I don't necessarily see him getting into a speed duel or going hell-bent for leather to get to the lead, but I think he's going to prompt the pace, and he's going to make, I was trying to think when we talked about our earliest previews of the Belmont, how loose Rock Your World was going to be, and if there was a case to be made. And the more I look at it, I feel like Hot Rod Charlie is very likely to make Rock Your World's journey in this race extremely difficult. Phillip could be right, and he could be loose out there. But I think between maybe getting a little bit of a pace injection from Francisco de Inna, the Japanese runner, that has the potential of lighting Rock Your World up, and then having Hot Rod Charlie be very conscious of not letting him get away, I'm personally not going to be playing the Rock Your World gets loose scenario, and I think it's going to work out unbelievably well for essential quality to just sit in behind that scrum, to be forward, to grind past on the turn and go on to win the race.
Yeah, and what I would say is, like, I'm going to have a very small amount of money on Rock Your World. There is just this, it's when I think about how I structure tickets just in general, and it's like, what has to happen for this horse to win? Because really, in multis, it doesn't matter if you think a horse can run good and run second or third. That just doesn't help you. So there is a world in which I think he could get loose. And if he wants, I agree with everything everybody said. I think he could be a bigger price. I could see like Hot Rod Charlie and Rombauer both getting bet. And I think ultimately for me, it came down to like Hot Rod. If you go back and watch the Derby, I mean, Hot Rod Charlie basically got a perfect trip. I mean, him and Mandaloon both. And you're like, if they should have won the race. I mean, I still don't know how Mandaloon didn't go past. And JK and I, we had a betting scenario. We would have won like 100,000+ had Mandaloon gone past, which is just sickening because he's going to eventually probably be declared the winner. We haven't joined the class action lawsuit yet, so me and JK can schedule a call after that. But I just think there's a scenario, right, where if Hot Rod Charlie's going to be 7-2 and Essential Quality is going to be 2-1, given they finished basically even, they finished together at the line. Hot Rod Charlie had a dream trip. Essential Quality had, I don't want to be too harsh on Louis because I don't really think he had another option than to ride the horse the way he rode him. Like normally you're like, oh, great, you broke from the 14. The way it played out, he just never really had a chance to tuck in unless he wanted to take back further, which probably would have cost him the race anyways. He was super wide throughout, but he just didn't have another alternative. So for me, the fact that they're going to be close in the betting, like Hot Rod Charlie feels like a horse that's going to take some steam, unless everybody just hops on Essential Quality. I mean, I do think there's a scenario that he could be like 7-5. But if they're anything with, to me, like I said, if Essential Quality is 2-1 and Hot Rod Charlie's 4-1, I mean, that just feels like I want to cut in front of, to use JK, I want to cut in front of everyone in the line.
Including Angel Cordero.
Yeah, I don't want to cut in front of just some of them. I'm pushing people out of the way to go make that bet. And with that said, Hot Rod Charlie could definitely win. He's a very similar kind of grindy type. He ran well enough in the Derby. But to me, it's like if he was as good as what I think it's going to take to beat what I think are a pretty good group of 3-year-olds, like he would have just gone past in the Derby, and he didn't.
Phillip, you got to be careful cutting in line in New York. It's a little bit tougher than a little tougher crowd than Keeneland.
Oh yeah, they will. They'll tell you about it, especially downstairs at Belmont Park now with the fans back.
I'm a big guy, so I'll get in there.
I love it. All right. Essential Quality has some fans on this show as far as the Belmont Stakes. Pete, we can take some questions here.
Let's do it. Absolutely. It's a great idea. We got about 10 minutes left, and we'll tell people wherever you're watching this live, if you want to drop a question in the comments, we'll try to get to as many as possible. Philip, we had a couple for you I want to knock out. We had a couple people ask about the Medallion runner in the Bed of Roses on Friday. Very curious to get your perspective on Estilo Talentoso and how this race shapes out.
Yeah, we're excited. I think we kind of looked for what the next race would be for her. She obviously ran a good third in the Derby City Distaff. That race has come back strong. Sconson won, really pretty easy in the winning colors. I don't know that was a super competitive race, but she won really as easy as she could. And she looks like she might be. There's obvious question marks with Gamine, just what's going to happen with Naira. Like, you look at a race like the Ballerina down the road, can Gamine even run there? So it feels like she's a filly that's at the top of the division. She ran second behind Kamari. Kamari, I assume, is going to go to Ascot. I don't know that. You may have more intel on that, but
yeah, it sounds like they were hemming and hawing about that a little bit.
So to me, if you have Gamine and Kamari as the two best dirt sprinters, there's a group right in behind, and basically Sconson and Estilo Talentoso were very close. We drew the outside. I'm not saying that we should be 4 to 5 or anything like that, but I think it's a really good spot for her. The one negative, she's basically stayed on a wrong lead both of the last 2 races, which is slightly concerning. She galloped out really good last time out, and I think she's very live on Friday.
We had a general question about Medallion too. Folks looking to see where they can get a little bit more information about everything you guys have going on over there, Philip.
Yeah, the best way is just the website, just medallionracing.com, and there's a link that you can send an email, and then I can get back to everybody through that. So,
and give the elevator pitch on what makes Medallion a little bit different than some of the other syndicates folks might be aware of.
Yeah, what I think I said last time, but it's just there are a lot of great partnerships out there, and what we did was we just try to focus on racing at a very high level. We have a Estilo Talent, and for a relatively small stable, we'll have somewhere between 8 to 12 horses over the course of a 2-year cycle. And we had 2 in the Gamely. It didn't go our way. We basically it wasn't a New York turf race, and we went 45 to the half, and it hurt both of our horses' chances. But we have a Estilo in on Friday. We'll have some other horses in big races later this summer. So we just really said we're going to focus on this graded stakes level experience, only fillies to minimize the downside risk, because once they can win a big race, they lock in residual. The race on Friday is a perfect example. Estilo Talentoso is multiple grade 1 placed, but she's not a graded stakes winner. So trying to get that graded stakes win, lock in the residual, and really what everybody wants, right, is to be in the graded stakes, be on the weekend. And by buying into proven horses, we just really hate to say the word guarantee, but we can really bring that experience to our investors. So that's the quick pitch.
That's good. That's good stuff. We've had a bunch of people asking further questions about Hot Rod Charlie. I'll chime in with my thought that I definitely agree he can win. For me, if he's ridden the way that I want to see him ridden, his best chance might be if Rock Your World just is kind of a no-show or just offers no resistance. I can see a world in which he can maybe get a tactical advantage. I was afraid from his point of view that Rock Your World would be good enough to leave Hot Rod Charlie potentially vulnerable late to a run from an Essential Quality or a Rombauer. But does anybody else have any specific thoughts about Hot Rod Charlie and his chances in this race? He does seem to be a popular one in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, look, he can win for sure. But here's the problem that I have when I'm looking at these types of races is if Essential Quality runs his best race, Hot Rod Charlie can't win. If Rombauer runs his best race, Hot Rod Charlie can't win. If Known Agenda jumps up and runs that Todd Pletcher Belmont and runs his best race, Hot Rod Charlie can't win. But Hot Rod Charlie's going to be the second or third choice. And so it's hard for me to lean on a horse who's going to be that short when so many things have to go their way for them to win. Absolutely can win, but I just think the other 3 are more likely.
Yeah, I would just completely reiterate on what, to me, it's more of a price thing. Like, if he was 6 or 7 to 1, then I'd be saying great. But yeah, exactly what Jonathan said. Like when I handicap any race, especially when it comes to multis, like if you're betting exactas or tries, that's a different kind of world because you got to handicap it different. When I'm trying to come up with a multi-race bet, and it's all about who can win and what's the scenario in which they can win. Every scenario in which Hot Rod Charlie wins, in my opinion, has to do with Essential Quality having some terrible luck. Like the way in which he wins is if Essential Quality stumbles at the start and is 7 lengths off the lead and Hot Rod Charlie sits second. And why would I want to play that scenario if they're going to be relatively even in the odds? I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be equal prices, but he's going to be the second or third choice at most. Like I would have him if I had a C ticket or something, I would use him. And I'm going to use him like equal weight to Rock Your World. But for me, it's just exactly what Jonathan said. Like I just have a hard time imagining the right scenario that puts him in the winner's circle.
We got an interesting question that came across the transom from Trish. Acacia, well, I think we should all answer this one. But Acacia, why don't we start with you? Is there a particular long shot of the really longer ones in the field you might be looking to mess around with in this year's Belmont Stakes?
Yeah, call me crazy, but my gut keeps going back to Overtook a bit. Now, I don't think that he's nearly as good as the horses that we've discussed, but he's one that I've always thought wants the longer distances and will probably relish 1.5 miles. Again, the Peter Pan, though it's 1.125 miles, is 1 turn. And Todd, instead of running the winner of that race, Promise Keeper, is going to run the 3rd place finisher from there and Overtook. The blinkers go back on. He wore them at the start of his career. And just from a physical standpoint, again, he's one that I've always wanted to see go longer. He'll be a monster price, and I don't think he's good enough to win, but maybe he's one that they paid $1 million for by Curlin. They have high hopes, and this could be a place that he could potentially get a little bit of that back if he hits the board.
I agree. That would have been the one that I would have answered if given that question. Phillip or JK, any love for either Bourbonic or the Japanese Raider?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this is going to be probably a pretty chalky try. This race typically doesn't give you a lot of bombs. I mean, the horses that are forward, that are good, that are fast, they usually finish in the try, and I think that's what will happen here. But if I had to make a case for one, it would probably be more of a superfecta play, but it's the one Bourbonic. You know, Kendrick understands the racetrack at Belmont. He understands the timing of when to go and how far he is from home. I've heard a lot of riders will say you can get lost out there sometimes. It's so big, you kind of forget where you're at. Obviously, I don't think that'll happen with Kendrick. And I don't think Bourbonic has to be as far back. I think Kendrick can maybe put him in the race a little bit more, understanding the dynamics of this race. So I think he makes a little bit of sense to kind of get in 3rd or 4th, but I would think that would be his ceiling. I just don't think he's fast enough.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think what kind of separates the Belmont from some of the other races, right, is that it's almost always a smaller field. You almost always get the best horses from the Derby, and you don't have as many mitigating factors, right? Like the Derby, you can get a bunch of long shots. It's 20 horses. Anything can happen. The Preakness, you don't get as many of the big Derby horses. If you do, they're coming back on 2 weeks. You get just a more eclectic mix of horses. The Belmont feels like the best horses from the Derby show up, and they normally run pretty good. And to me, that's what this feels like. Overtook has a monster pedigree. I could certainly see throwing the blinkers on. He's going to be ridden more aggressively. If I had to come up with one, I would probably just default with Jonathan and say Bourbonic. I think Carmouche has ridden well. Again, nobody made up much ground in the Derby. He was always going to be compromised. He, drew obviously the far outside. Personally, I'm buddies with Carmouche's agent, so I would love it for them if he ran good. But I would agree. It feels relatively chalky to me.
One racetrack gossip type question, and then we will get out of here. Does anybody know if Irad had the opportunity to ride a horse other than Known Agenda in this race? I hadn't heard anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard. Acacia's around there. She might know better. I guarantee that it wasn't even a conversation when it came with the St. Elias situation and what they did with Vino Rosso and the Todd and Irad new kind of found love deal. I can't imagine it was even a conversation.
No, he's been committed to this horse from that allowance win in February at Gulfstream. That was a race to see if he could get back on the Triple Crown trail. At that time, Irad was riding another Todd Pletcher horse called Prime Factor, who ran in the first couple of preps down there in Florida, and turns out he just doesn't want to go that far. And I remember in the press conference after the Florida Derby. Of course, I read one Unknown Agenda. He said, I'm really thankful we found my Derby horse because I was getting a little bit worried there because Prime Factor doesn't want to go the distance. So he's been committed to Known Agenda all along. As Jonathan mentioned, a good relationship with Vinny Viola, who was flying Irad Ortiz, and Jose Ortiz, who rode Dynamic One, flying them down to Louisville to work those horses prior to the Derby. So this has been Irad's horse all along.
And the horse, granted, it's not just the rider change, it's the blinkers and getting more mature. But boy, what a fruitful partnership it's been. It's actually another reason why I like the horse. All right, we are out of time. So we have to thank our panel, Acacia Courtney, JK, Phillip, Shelton. Fantastic to have you here. We want to encourage everybody to participate in this $1 pick six on Belmont Day. Thank you so much to everybody who watched live, everybody watching on YouTube, on the In the Money Media channel. We encourage you to subscribe over there and get more content from us and check out everything going on over at inthemoneypodcast.com. Our listeners, our viewers, they make all the shows we do so much fun to do. Thanks. One final thank you to producer Craig, DJ Unstable himself, pushing all the right buttons. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your Belmont Stakes photos.